Let's talk money.
Welcome back. So this week we are discussing thematic funds and whether these theme-specific concepts, whether they make sense for your portfolio or not. So we have a question coming in from one of our viewers, Siddharth. He's written in to us on one of the social media platforms, and he's saying, I want to invest in a thematic fund, but I'm unsure of how to choose one and where to begin. I think very simple, very basic question. It's exactly what we're trying to understand and answer, Siddharth. So, Ruchit, what would you say? What should be the starting point? You said that the exposure to any such theme should not be more than 15% of the portfolio.
Thematics as an aggregate should not be more than 20% of your total investment. And within that, not a single fund should be more than 10%. Or single fund stroke single theme. It shouldn't be more than 10%. So that's the broad thumb rule, I would say. So,
and what are the questions that you'd ask before deciding and checking yes on a fund?
So one is I would want to see whether the particular fund, whether it's an active fund or a passive fund. Okay. Second is between the active funds, is this more of a well-diversified fund? Because, one of the more interesting aspects of a thematic fund is, and this kind of gets missed out, is that why actually choose a thematic fund? If you like a particular sector, you can say, oh, but my fund manager already has overweighted the sector.
Yeah.
Perhaps. But what happens is that when you're overweighting, right, you still buy a very limited number of stocks. A typical portfolio is, say, 50 to 60 stocks. If I'm buying a particular sector, I may have 4 or 5 stocks, or maybe 7 or 8. Bulk of them, maybe 50% more, could be large capish or mid capish. You don't get an ability to play a diversified set of stocks. In a thematic fund, typically an actively managed thematic fund will have 20, 25 odd stocks, right? And it gives you a wide basket of stocks to kind of invest into. Like our energy fund, right? We're the same thing. It is not just your traditional large cap names, but there are 25, 30 stocks. Some of them we could have never invested or never looked at because we didn't have the capacity to invest. Now we have a thematic fund where we can invest in some of these securities. So look at that, whether it's an actively managed, A, B, is it a very well diversified fund or not? C is also, again, talk to your advisor, try and get an understanding that is this a theme that's likely to play out from a 3, 5, 7 year standpoint, and based on your risk appetite, you can choose a particular fund that suits your need.
Fair enough. Feroze, you want to add to that? Things to keep in mind?
Things to keep in mind is one, definitely, that how old is that theme? Like infrastructure. People, like he said that, Ruchit Saab said that you can't have more than 10%. Into one specific theme because you have to consider risks. This is the biggest anomaly or biggest problem which happened in 2008. Diversified fund had gone 50-60% in infrastructure.
Yeah.
Clients got so attracted and bought 30% more of infrastructure. I have seen a portfolio which had 92% infrastructure. Wow. And then 2008 happened. And you saw drops of 70% in that portfolio.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And Nifty fell 40-50%, but this infrastructure fell 70-80%. So point is, don't go very heavy. Don't go to a very old, popular theme. Now, for example, momentum for the last 2 years was a great theme. There are only 2 funds.
Okay.
That means it's not a rundown kind of a theme. It's not old wine in a new bottle. Right? Energy. You don't have so many funds, right? So that's a newer theme. So always go for a newer theme. Okay. Consumption was manufacturing. Now, for example, transportation. There are 5 schemes of transportation, right? And it's the oldest one would be maybe 1.5 years back.
Okay.
So that means this is not still played out. So first thing which investors should look at is it a theme which is old wine in a new bottle, or there's something new which has been identified? Okay. Second, don't go passive, is my opinion, because the theme as a concept is top-down. Again, if you go top-down, buy the full index. Top-down plus top-down is not a very dangerous strategy.
High risk.
Very high risk.
Yeah.
If I'm buying a theme, then I will want Ruchir to actually filter down some very bad apples.
Do some, stock picking and get the best sort of companies in that fund, right?
And eliminate, even if you don't get the best, you have to eliminate those 5 bad ones, which don't have the right governance, which an index will not be able to. Index is a growth index. The better it does, the more weightage it gets. More weightage it gets, better it does. It's a chicken and egg story. So never go passive in a theme. I would rather trust a research house to eliminate those 5-7. They might reduce my return, but I'm okay to live without 2-3% extra, but I would not fund a business which is not compliant.
Pretty interesting. And
just to add to one more element, and this is very interesting, that most thematic funds will have a particular benchmark. And if you look at bulk of the benchmarks that are there, roughly 5 stocks, give or take, right, would be almost 70-80% of the benchmark weight. So if you go passive, you're essentially just buying 5 stocks. You're not buying a diversified portfolio. And therefore, active here makes a lot more difference because you can say, look, I'm not going to buy a very large cap particular stock in the theme just because it's part of the benchmark. I can underweight it and buy a lot many more companies which earlier would not have been looked into.
Yeah,
please. I want to again add on Ruchit.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example to amplify his point. Bank Nifty, very popular.
Yeah.
2 stocks are 57%. Yeah. When you ask a person, I met a trader who says, I trade in Bank Nifty. I said, just take a guess, what are the top 2 stocks weightages? He didn't know. And he guessed 25%. Yeah. So point is, you might think, and this is a very widely traded index. Yeah. You ask anybody who's trading it, would not know that 60% is in 2 stocks. Yeah. So what you think optically is a lower risk, when you go passive, you're buying very few businesses.
True. And that's a risk that you have to bear in mind if you're going to be in a thematic fund and then be in a passive fund, which is going to mirror the entire index corresponding to that particular theme or sector. So that's a point well taken. Now, just to talk about the themes here and now. Now, we've done the theory part of it. I think people really want to know what could be looking good from here on. You mentioned energy. I think that's the one theme that SBI has chosen to play. Anything else when you look out and you're looking at structural themes that can run, what should investors perhaps at least consider and go back and do their homework? Sure.
So 2 other thematic funds that we did this year, right? The second was the Automotive Opportunities Fund. See, Indian automotive industry is at a very interesting juncture where, and again, if you build out, say, growth in our country over the next 5, 7, 10 years and the corresponding increase in per capita incomes, incrementally, a lot of the income growth is going to go towards discretionary consumption, right? Because you're starting to fulfill the basic needs of roti, kapda, makan, right? So then people are wondering, what can I buy more, right? And transportation or personal means of transportation are a very significant aspiration aspect of any consumer. So we think that automotive as a sector will play out very nicely over the coming few years. There is also a very interesting aspect of the automotive industry that itself is going through a bit of a disruption itself, right? With the whole potential transition to the EV space, and you're going to see a lot many more interesting companies come up for listing, which in the auto industry hasn't happened for a good part of a decade, right? So you got new OEMs coming up for listing. So it's an interesting way to play that. The second is that the whole innovation theme, right? And this is a very interesting aspect of India is that again. Today, consumers are willing to look at newer products from newer brands, newer categories of consumption as well. And they're no longer happy with just buying the traditional brands or the standalone brand. They're very happy to say that, look, hey, I saw this on, say, social media, or I saw this in, from at a friend's house or, through word of mouth. And these are all completely brand new categories. They're completely brand new companies, newer brands, etc. So you're seeing a lot of innovation happening on the product space, on the brand space, on the technology space as well, right? EVs transition, the green energy transition, etc. So I think innovation as a concept in India has a very long way to run. I think it is one of those themes that, in our opinion, could be sort of a multi-decadal thing. Highly risky because rather than any traditional fund, because a lot of these companies are going to be new age startup kind of thing with burning cash right now. Profits are going to come later. So for those with a high risk appetite, we would recommend looking at the innovation theme as well.
The innovation theme. Okay, got it. Feroze, your thoughts on this? And sometimes what happens is that if you do have a diversified thematic fund, like you mentioned, infrastructure, I think investors can also ask the counter question that if it's going to have a lot of banks and a lot of large cap stocks which are already there in my large cap fund, then do I need the thematic or not? So just your final thoughts on the subject and the kind of thematic funds that you would consider.
I think, very microscopically from their basket, I've chosen SBI Infra because the fund manager has been an infrastructure analyst way back in 2007 as well. Okay. So he has seen the fund manager being an analyst of that sector for 15 years brings in a lot of merit.
And he's seen the boom and the crash and the burn, all of it.
And infrastructure went through a very long lull. And your fund manager being an analyst, it's like a general being the soldier. Okay, so that's one reason why I've chosen that. Second, I think it's very important to make sure that when you're looking at sectors, themes especially, when you're looking at themes, you make sure that you stick to larger AMCs. And if you ask me which is the thing which I am excited about, of course, this is the theme which is not translated into several funds. I'm looking at tourism. Tourism, there is an index, Nifty Tourism Index, which takes 30 large companies from NSE 500 which represent that industry, but there are not too many funds which are replicating that. There's one more thing which I am...
There's a passive fund that's come in on the tourism index as well, right? But you're saying don't do passives when you're doing themes.
So I'm waiting for that theme to develop itself.
Okay.
There's also one Nifty IPO index, which replicates the IPO performance of the last 100 IPOs.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm really hopeful because what happens is an asset management company gets anchor positions in an IPO.
Right.
Right. Of course, anchor is also oversubscribed, but there's an anchor book which closes before a retail book. Right. So if I, as a retail guy, don't want to open 19 demat accounts, 20 demat accounts and apply for a specific IPO to get those 2 lotteries, I go through a fund route and capitalize. These are the 2 emerging themes which are definitely not translated into enough opportunity today. I would be very excited if large AMCs like SBI took it up and brought me something which is executable.
Okay, so tourism and IPOs. If there can be some interesting thematic funds around this as well, something to watch. Gentlemen, it's been a very helpful discussion. Thank you so much for joining in and shedding some light on this sort of new area of investing, which is thematic. So really appreciate you being with us in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this week's episode. Hope you found the conversation useful. Keep sending us your feedback, comments, and queries. We will see you with another theme next week.
Let's talk money.